All right. Well, welcome back. This is Patrick Anderson. I'm your host. And today we're having a conversation about the Thin Blue Line Law Enforcement Motorcycle Club and this terrible tragedy accident that happened in Kerrville, Texas over the weekend, July 18th. So we have on the call with us Ron Pollack from Fighting for Bikers Injury Law. And Ron, welcome to the show today.
Thanks, Pat. Good to be here.
Yeah, so what happened was this drunk driver came across the center line at around noon, in the middle of the day, and just crashed into this group of bikers who were riding in staggered format, to be safer. And this particular club, the Thin Blue Line, they're an amazing group of people, current and retired law enforcement. They do a lot of good in the community. They're always doing things like helping the homeless and supporting food banks and fallen riders and things like that. So I was able to talk to Steve Wyatt, who's the president of the Fort Myers chapter, and he was telling me that they had several members from that chapter there in Texas as well, about 300 people celebrating one of their big birthdays. And here comes this guy out of nowhere, plows into him, kills three people, injures four. One guy had his leg just terribly damaged, bike's caught on fire, and now they're going to have two or 300 riders at each one of the three funerals coming up. So for you, Ron, the question on everybody's minds is, how would you get justice for these riders if this terrible accident had happened in Pennsylvania?
Thanks, Pat. I appreciate the opportunity to discuss this with you. It is a horrible tragedy, and unfortunately, it happens all too often. You have people who are drinking and driving. We're now in the summertime months, especially now that our country is starting to open back up again. People are getting back out, and they're not being wise in some of their choices and decisions. And they're going out and they're drinking because they're finally able to, and then they get behind the wheel. Now, in Pennsylvania, like throughout the country, drunk driving laws are severely punishable if you go out. And they've lowered the actual drinking limit in Pennsylvania. Once upon a time, it was a .10, now it's a .08. So there's really no gray area. If you're going to drink, then don't get behind the wheel. With all these advents of Uber and Lyft and different driving sources, don't ever get behind the wheel of a car. And as someone who represents people who ride motorcycles regularly, absolutely don't get on a bike if you've ever had a drink at all as well. But with regards to the way to get justice for something like this, there's actually two aspects to it. There's a potential criminal aspect. And in the situation that you were talking about with the accident down south, there were actually deaths as well as severe injuries. So you're talking, if you get behind the wheel and drink like that, then there's going to be probably vehicular homicide and negligent homicide type criminal charges brought against them. Realistically, as an attorney who represents people for the injuries that are involved, other than cooperating with the police and assisting them in any way possible and making sure that all of the witnesses are available to them, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania is the entity that's going to actually be bringing those charges and taking that action. But what we can do, representing people who are injured and representing bikers, is we can make sure that the injured party or the family members are protected presently as well as into the future. And we do that by bringing an appropriate claim against the individual. And if there's other factors that are involved, we investigate that. We determine whether or not the place where that person was drinking, if it's a bar, so to speak, if they were serving someone who was visibly intoxicated, then that bar may also have responsibility under what's called the dram shop laws. So there's a lot of
Right,
investigation that needs to go into this. And we want to make sure that we have a complete understanding as to where the person was drinking, how much he had been drinking, for how long he had been drinking. Are there witnesses that are involved? There are times when we've been involved in biker accidents as well as dram shop cases where we've taken ads out in local newspapers, we've published in social media to try to find out if there are witnesses, if that person has been drinking in a public or business establishment, to make sure that all of the potential available recovery is followed through with, and all of the potentially responsible parties are punished. And when we say punish, we're not necessarily talking about punishment in the literal sense, like the criminal aspect, but that they're brought to justice and that fair and full and complete compensation to protect that family, protect that injured individual is followed through so that they get everything they're entitled to.
Right. So, what would you do for the families of the deceased? So they're going through a terrible time. How does your law firm support them at that point?
Well, there's two aspects to this kind of a case. Anytime someone passes away, you have what's known as a wrongful death case. And there's also a survivor action. So anytime someone passes away, there's two types of lawsuits. And with regards to the wrongful death case, that is specifically written up in the laws to compensate the beneficiaries of that estate. You're dealing with wives, you're dealing with children. Sometimes there are other dependents who may be involved in that. And there are very specific areas of the law and damages that you're entitled to receive if there's a death that's involved. Financial remuneration. There is also, Pennsylvania has a case that came down a number of years ago that also talks about the what's called the companionship, the consortium, the guidance, the support mentally that someone provides. And that law was critical in really changing the area of wrongful death in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. The other area, and what we do is we investigate all of those areas to determine what someone provided to a family financially, as well as what support, not just financial, but otherwise, in terms of guidance, information. Uh, are you someone who is a teacher to the family? Are you the patriarch of the family? Does the family members come to you to look for you for guidance with regards to making decisions in their life? All of this comes into play. So we talk to all the members of the family. But as part of that, we're also very compassionate and understanding as it relates to what that family is going through. And we provide support for them. One of the things that makes me very different than a lot of lawyers out there is that I've actually been through that process. My wife, as a result of an accident, suffered severe spinal cord injury. She's had nine spine surgeries. She lives in chronic pain. She's disabled as a result of it. So I understand the devastation that something like this can have on a family. So when there's emotional support, whether you need to get them to a counselor to assist them in talking with them, just being there for them and listening is critically important to understanding what assistance that family is going to need to help them to get through this and to honor that person's memory rather than themselves get sucked into what could be a black hole of depression when someone passes away. So we provide support for them from all of those avenues. The other part of the case, and this applies to both the person who survived and had those severe leg injuries, as well as the people who passed away, is known as a survival action. And that's what most people think of when you have any kind of accident where you have survived the incident. Pain and suffering, emotional distress, scarring, all of the damages that get brought into play. There's two types of damages: economic damages, which is medical bills, lost wages, other types of things, money that you would contribute to the household, just in terms of not maybe paying, but you do things around the house, you take care of the house, you do work around the house, you do the trash, things that you may now have to hire somebody or somebody else may have to do that for you. That has an economic value that we evaluate on your behalf. And in addition, there's what's known formally as non-economic damages. Most people think of that as pain and suffering, but it's significantly more than that. As I said, it is pain and suffering, but it's also the emotional distress. It's physical disfigurement. A big part of it, to me, it's one of the most important, is how has this impacted your life? How has it affected your ability to perform your normal activities of daily living? So we take a lot of time understanding and listening to our clients. Our whole purpose is to be there for you and for them and help them through this. We want to make sure that through the insurance process, through the bill payment process, that we handle all of that stuff for you so that the family can concentrate on, if they're still alive, getting well, if they're unfortunately have a death involved, in the normal grieving process. The last thing they want to think about is, how are we going to deal with bills? How are we going to deal with insurance companies? How are we going to deal with the paperwork that's involved? How are we going to deal with, you know, getting the funeral place paid, and on all these different things. Is there life insurance? Isn't there life insurance? This is what we do, and we provide not only the representation to handle the claim for compensation for those types of damages that we talked about, but we're there as a support system throughout the whole process, because helping people is the most important part of this aspect.
Yeah, that you just shared a whole lot of things that I didn't know, and I'm sure our listeners are going to be interested in. Now, one of the things that comes up is this idea of who's at fault, who's to blame. And one of our listeners wrote in asking about comparative negligence. And another idea that came up was this guy was a really bad dude. I mean, he'd been arrested previously. He ran over a guy at a bar in the parking lot with his car, bit off his ear, attacked him viciously. So when you've got issues like that and other things, when do ideas like punitive damages come in? So maybe talk about those two issues.
Certainly, Pat. That's a great question, actually. And this is one of the reasons why it's critically important to actually hire an attorney to represent your interests through this. There's a lot of subtlety, there's a lot of nuance involved in the law that most people just don't know about. And actually, it's really, really important to hire an attorney who concentrates his practice on handling biker accidents, because the laws are different. Someone who does, contract law, yeah, they're going to say, hey, I can get involved. But in reality, they're not going to know all the subtleties and all the nuance and all of the important issues that come up with something like that. And, first of all, you got rules of evidence. Are you a trial lawyer? That's one of the things that we pride ourselves on. In addition to being a lawyer, we actually, I have an advanced legal degree known as a legal master's degree, an LLM in trial advocacy. So I've had a lot of extra training just in dealing with these kinds of cases, and dealing with, if the thing doesn't resolve, if the case doesn't resolve and you have to go to court, there's a lot of issues involving evidentiary issues. Can the other criminal aspect of his background come into play? And most of the time, what most people don't realize, even if this guy's a bad dude, like you just said, and he's got prior incidents involved, most of that time, the rules of evidence preclude and prevent you from bringing that out into the courtroom. So there's strategies involved in trying to determine, is there a way to bring it out that's appropriate? And is there a way to bring it out to make sure that the truth is known? But you've got to be really careful with that. The punitive damages aspect is a whole other area of damages, and that is, in fact, to punish. Most of the damages that people get in these kinds of cases deal with compensating them for what they've actually, what we call the harms and losses, those economic damages and those pain and the disfigurement and the effect on your life. Punitive damages are specifically established to punish someone. And what people have to understand is, sometimes you may not want to get a punitive damage claim involved, because once punitive damages are involved, if you were able to show that somebody acted intentionally, insurance coverages may not apply anymore. And insurance has exclusions for intentional acts. So you got to be really careful. Do you want it or don't you? Because most individuals may not have the assets and may not have the ability to properly compensate you. So if you go after a certain aspect of this case because you're trying to punish someone, and I'm talking on the civil side, this is not the criminal side. You may actually blow out your insurance coverage, so now you don't have coverage from that perspective. So you have to be really careful what you want to get involved in. In certain times, you can bring in both civil damages as well as punitive. For example, the drinking and driving, but you've got to show very specific recklessness and carelessness. If this person has had a number of drunk driving offenses and had his license taken away and has a vehicle that has one of those breathalyzers that you can't even start it until you breathe into it, and he disables it, he bypasses it, and he says, I don't have my license, but I'm driving anyway, and then goes out and gets drunk. That's an area where you may be able to get both. And these are things that we do investigate and make a determination. But again, you got to be careful, because not careful, but not always, even when you get these kinds of damages and punitive damages, and you get a recovery against somebody for a lot of money, you may not necessarily recover it if that person doesn't have any assets or doesn't have an ability. So there's a lot of subtlety to this to make sure that the family and the injured party, or the person who's passed away, his estate and the beneficiaries, are properly protected. It's one of the reasons I really tell people it's very important to get a lawyer to represent your interests. And even more so, it's very important to get a lawyer. And if it's in Pennsylvania, whether it's me or somebody else, somebody who concentrates their practice on handling these kinds of cases, wrongful death cases, these types of injury cases, as well as who represents on a regular basis bikers like ourselves.
Right. Now, you also told me that people can call you if they've got any kinds of questions, that you don't charge for consultations and good, strong advice, right?
Absolutely. Being a member of our community is very important to me and the members of my team. So we have made an absolute rule that we are there to help people. So if you have any questions about the law, if you have any questions about your insurance policy, we are happy to provide you with a free, complimentary insurance review to determine whether or not you have the right coverages. Now, as bikers, this is really important because, first of all, most people don't recognize or realize that there are a lot of choices to be made relative to that insurance policy. And let me tell you, insurance agents work for the insurance company. They don't, work
Yeah.
for you.
Right.
And people think they're my agent, and that they're there to protect me. I can tell you, I have seen it every single day. What people think is quote unquote full coverage is not really proper protection.
Right.
Full coverage means you comply with the law of that particular state. It doesn't mean that you're actually protecting yourself, your family, your assets, your future. And it is critically important in areas of what's called uninsured motorist coverage, if someone has no insurance, or underinsured motorist coverage. And on motorcycles, more than anything, quite often, and we've all heard it through the years, Pat. I'm sure you've heard it more than I have. That it's not necessarily a matter of when you may be involved in an accident on a motorcycle. It's a matter of if, or not a matter of if. It's a matter of when. And all too often, motorcycle accidents, the injuries are severe or critical, and people pass away just by the nature of the fact that you're in an open air space, and if a car's not paying attention and slams into you, devastating things occur. So it is really important to have the right coverage. So even if the other side has insurance, you can purchase protection for yourself. And there's a lot. Again, I could talk about this topic for an hour, Pat. I actually do lectures on this and provide free seminars as well. So if anyone out there would like me to come speak, absolutely free. I'm happy to do it for a club, an organization, anyone who wants information so that they know that they're protected, whether it be the insurance issues or the legal concepts involving what happens when you're involved in an accident involving a motorcycle. Are you properly protected? Happy to do it, and we do it all the time. We also provide free webinars and things of that nature periodically as well online. So all of this comes into play, and we provide this service absolutely free. Let me get back to one quick question. You had asked me also about comparative or contributory negligence. That's an interesting topic because Pennsylvania, it's not called contributory negligence, it's called comparative negligence. And there's a distinction. And depending upon what state you're in, the law is different. There are some states where if you are found contributory negligent, and what that means is you have a certain level of responsibility for causing the incident. Even though the other vehicle went through a red light and you had a green light, if it's a really wide open area and you had a clear area to see that the person was not stopping, and just say you're the passenger on the motorcycle and the driver, and you're like, hey, stop, 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 and they didn't stop, even though because they had a green light, even though you clearly saw the driver wasn't going to stop, the driver of your motorcycle that you're a passenger on is going to be partially at fault, as well as the driver who went through the red light, because they had an obligation to make proper observations. Now, what if you're that driver and you had the obligation to make proper observations? That's called contributory negligence. In some states that are pure contributory negligence states, if you have any responsibility at all, you get zero. You get nothing. Pennsylvania, we compare the negligence. That's why it's called comparative negligence. And as long as the other person or the responsible party's negligence is 50% or more than yours, then you're still entitled to recover. So let's just say you failed to make proper observations, and as a result, it was determined you're 25% at fault and your case is worth $100,000. In that situation, the person who was responsible would pay 75% of the value of your case, and the 25% that you're responsible would be reduced. So that $100,000 claim would now be reduced by the 25%, so you'd be entitled to the $75,000 that the other person is responsible for their 75%. So that's how comparative negligence works in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And again, these are subtle issues at times, and there's a lot of things that have to be done with regards to facts and investigation. I had a case very similar to what I just talked about, where somebody we maintained went through a red light and crashed into this young gentleman who was a biker, and he, because of the nature of injuries, couldn't remember whether the light was green or red. But he truly believed he would have never. He was a very careful rider. He'd done a lot of study and he'd been riding for years, and he did know and he did remember definitively where he came from. So before we made any decisions, what did we do? I went out, we got in our vehicle, we followed the path exactly. And oh, by the way, and the police officer was not supportive of the biker. Not surprising sometimes, unfortunately. And we went out and we did a lot of investigation. We went out, we mapped out the exact route, we drove it at the exact same time of day, we followed the light patterns, and lo and behold, when you followed the speed limit and you were roughly within right where that speed limit was, the light for our client turned green. It was the other person. We were able to utilize that information during the case through depositions. We disbanded the testimony from the police officer, so it was no longer credible, and we settled that case for policy limits, ultimately without having to go to trial. So there's a lot of stuff that goes into this. So it's more than what necessarily meets the eye, and this is again why it's so important, as someone who represents bikers, to make sure that you get the information, you listen to your client, you talk to them, you find out from the family where people were coming from, because the situation isn't always what it may seem, especially when there's these inherent biases sometimes against motorcycle riders.
Well, Ron, this is a lot of great information. We've been talking with Ron Pollack with Fighting for Bikers Injury Law. And Ron, now also, besides injuries, if people have issues with DUIs or they need legal defense for criminal activities or say Second Amendment rights, you still want them to call your office?
Absolutely. The way we view it is, when you become a client of Fighting for People Injury Law, Fighting for Bikers Injury Law, we have two firms, one which handles bikers claims and one which handles regular injury claims. Our viewpoint is, it's not just a business transaction. You become a friend for life. And our goal and my goal is to always become what is your trusted legal advisor. I want you to feel comfortable because you know that we're there for you. To give us a call. If you have any legal questions, any legal issues at all, give us a call. Quite often there's things that we can handle for you, and there occasionally are things that we can't handle for you, because we do concentrate our area representing bikers and innocent victims who've been injured as a result of somebody else not following the safety rules. But we do other things. But if there's something that we can't handle, I've been doing this for over 30 years, well connected throughout the community, so that I can always assist in making an appropriate referral or recommendation to get you to the right person that I think is going to be able to help you and get you what you need. Absolutely. We can always be reached. We have an 800 number, 1-800-549-4LAW, 1-800-549. Also for bikers, fightingforbikers.com. Fightingforbikers.com is our website. And as you said, Fighting for Bikers Injury Law, you can reach us on Facebook as well. And we're here for you. We're always here to help.
Well, Ron, thank you again. We're coming up on a break, and if you don't mind, stick around. I've got a couple other questions for you. All right, we're back with Ron Pollack from Fighting for Bikers Injury Law. Hey, Ron, at the break, you were mentioning that you have a free legal guide for bikers, and that you also have a rider VIP card with extra benefits. Why don't you tell our listeners about those?
Yeah, no, we actually have exactly that. There's three different resources that we have, totally free of charge. We have a book that we published that we're out that I participated in authoring. We have a what to do if involved in a motorcycle brochure that is really an excellent resource to keep on your motorcycle that if you're ever involved in an accident, it walks you right through the information that you need to obtain and how to make sure that you're properly protected. And that's not only if you're the innocent victim, but sometimes, bikers cause accidents too, but it also protects you there too when you've got to be defended if you've caused an accident. We also have a rider VIP card that provides valuable information that you can stick right in your wallet with important information, not only with the right phone numbers to make sure that you're protected, but also key tips to ensure that you're properly protected if you're involved in an accident. Also, Pat, I know one of the things that tends to happen sometimes. We were talking about the accident down south, and because of that, we were focused on the fact that it was gentlemen who were riding. Relative to this particular incident. But please understand, we've got phenomenal women riders out there and ladies who love to ride themselves. And their rights and their protections are just as important, if not more so, sometimes because they suffer even worse injuries sometimes just purely because of the nature of the way they're built. So it's really important to understand that this is, riding a bike is for everybody, and it's one of the greatest things you can do. It's a sense of freedom, it's a sense of love, it's a sense of passion when you're on a motorcycle. And whether you're a man or a woman, whether you're the patriarch or the matriarch of the family, you need to be protected with the right insurance coverage. And if you've ever been involved in a collision, you need to be protected by the right lawyer who concentrates on these kinds of cases and who really cares about you, not just, hey, I have a case. This is about you. And having gone through this experience with my wife as well as myself, I appreciate it from every aspect of it. And that's why we've dedicated our firm. And that's why we called it Fighting for Bikers, because all too often insurance companies have a lot of money and a lot of resources behind them. And they use the stigma of biking sometimes. They use believed to be, expensive lawyers sometimes, and they're not necessarily, that good. But you need to have someone who really understands this area of the law to be there for you, man, woman, and child.
Well, Ron, thanks again. I'm sure our listeners are going to appreciate all this knowledge and information that you shared. I know I did. And listen, you have a wonderful day, you and your wife.
You too, Pat. And if anybody has any questions, we're here for them. Again, simple phone call, 1-800-549-4LAW, LAW, which is 4529. We're always here from you, and we're available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, because accidents occur during non-business hours too. So we're always available here for you.